You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Agents of the Obama administration conducted a military-style raid. They barged into a factory loaded with suspected illegal plant products. Brandishing automatic weapons, the feds separated the workers for interrogation. The government seized computers, records, and over $1.5 million worth of illicit product. Just another day in the life of a medical marijuana dispensary out west? Think again. This was a federal raid of the Gibson guitar factory in Memphis, Tennessee, and the illegal plant products in question are ebony wood used in the guitar's fingerboards. Now, you can hear Lee Stranahan's exclusive interview with the Gibson CEO on his blog, leestranahan.com. As I listened to it, I chuckled in sympathy with CEO Henry E. Juskowitz, complaining about the federal tactics, the automatic weapons and terrified employees, production shutdowns and asset forfeiture, government stonewalling, lack of charges being filed, all over a business he believes to be perfectly legal. Hey, it's a story we tell here weekly. Businessmen investigate regulations, strive to obey every letter of the law, and the feds respond with bully tactics designed not to try them in court, but just to shut them down. Only this time it was wood, not pot. Now look, I'll grant it's a stretch to compare Gibson guitar's situation to that of the medical marijuana dispensaries. Guitars are quite legal. It's just the 1900 Lacey Act, this is from the year 1900, and its 2008 amendments that are unclear. The Lacey Act protects endangered flora and fauna by prohibiting trade in America of products acquired illegally in other countries. But in this case, the United States is saying that Gibson broke other countries' laws, even though those countries don't believe their laws were broken. Now, the federal ban on marijuana, on the other hand, despite being absurd and medically incorrect, is quite clear. The Supreme Court has decided plainly that the federal government has the right to ban a plant, no matter what California, Colorado, or anybody else has to say about it. However, you will find quite a bit of reefer madness-style absurdity in the regulations that cover other plants like ebony and rosewood. And this comes from the Wall Street Journal. If you're the lucky owner of a 1920s Martin guitar, it may well be made in part of Brazilian rosewood. Cross an international border with an instrument made of that now restricted wood, and you better have correct and complete documentation proving the age of the instrument. Otherwise, you could lose it to a zealous customs enforcement agent, not to mention face fines and prosecution. The tangled intersection of international laws is enforced through a thicket of paperwork. Recent revisions to 1900's Lacey Act require that anyone crossing the U.S. border declare every bit of flora or fauna being brought into the country. One is under, quote, strict liability, end quote, to fill out the paperwork, and without any mistakes. Now, it's not enough to know that the body of your guitar is made out of spruce and maple. What's the bridge made out of? If it's made out of ebony, do you have the paperwork to show them where and when that wood was harvested and where and when it was made into a bridge? Is the nut holding the strings at the guitar's headstock bone, or could it be ivory? Now, look, it's commendable to have these laws that protect endangered species, and the ivory poaching is particularly repellent. But many people have old pianos with ivory keys. How many of them do you suppose have kept any set of paperwork proving their piano's age? In one case that the Wall Street Journal told about, one antique importer took a plea deal for $17,500 fine and 3 years probation under the threat of several years in prison for a series of pianos he imported into the country. And how many old blues players really know what wood is used in the various parts of their guitars? And how many guys like Slash from Guns N' Roses have more guitars than they can possibly remember and travel all over the world with them frequently? Now, according to the Gibson Company, they aren't even in violation of the acts that the government is raiding them over, and they have complied with all laws. Now, of course, you'd expect them to say that since they're the ones being charged, but it seems like the governments other than ours that are involved in this issue don't want these prosecutions either. That's right, prosecutions, because this is the second time the Obama administration has raided Gibson guitars. This is from the press release on Gibson guitars. The Federal Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. has suggested that the use of wood from India that is not finished by Indian workers is illegal, not because of a U.S. law, but because it is the Justice Department's interpretation of a law in India. If the same wood from the same tree was finished by Indian workers, the material would be legal. This action was taken without the support and consent of the government in India. In 2009, more than a dozen agents with automatic weapons invaded the Gibson factory in Nashville. The government seized guitars and a substantial amount of ebony fingerboard blanks from Madagascar. To date, 1 year and 9 months later, criminal charges have not been filed, yet the government still holds Gibson's property. Gibson has obtained sworn statements and documents from the Madagascar government, and these materials, which have been filed in federal court, show that the wood seized in 2009 was legally exported under Madagascar law and that no law had been violated. Gibson is attempting to have its property returned in a civil proceeding that is pending in federal court. Now, those of us in our biz here in medical marijuana, we know that under asset forfeiture laws, the feds can claim that Gibson's wood imports are illegal and Gibson has to prove that they are not. The property is guilty until proven innocent. The government has held on to Gibson's property for 21 months now without charging any human being with a crime. Gibson's CEO hypothesizes in the Stranahan interview that you can hear that the timing of these latest raids is just an intimidation tactic since an important hearing date is forthcoming. Now, one significant way that the Gibson story and medical marijuana dispensaries differ is that cannabis is being ingested by humans in its raw form. Well, another raw product that has been ingested by humans for thousands of years is raw milk. And the Obama administration seems just as determined to stamp out any market for it as well. This comes from the blog of Bob Barr, the former Georgia congressman, writing in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in his column called The Barr Code. In the latest example of raw police power, Rawsome Foods, a members-only health food store in Venice, California, that specializes in raw milk and organic foods, recently was the target of just such a SWAT-style raid. This followed by a year-long investigation by federal, state, and local authorities. According to a video about the raid from Reason.tv, the agents destroyed all the raw milk in stock at the store and carted off thousands of dollars in produce. James Stewart, the owner of the store, was arrested during the raid and faces numerous criminal charges, including conspiracy, processing milk without pasteurization, and operating an unlicensed milk plant. His supplier, Sharon Palmer, who owns Healthy Family Farms, was arrested in a separate raid. Now, the government, through the Centers for Disease Control, is very quick to point out the dangers of consuming raw milk. They say, quote, "Before the invention and acceptance of pasteurization, raw milk was a common source of the bacteria that caused tuberculosis, diphtheria, severe streptococcal infections, typhoid fever, and other foodborne illnesses. These illnesses killed many people each year, especially young children. In the 1900s, many mothers recognized this risk and would boil milk, bringing it to a temperature of 212 Fahrenheit, before giving it to their infants and young children." However, I am just as quick to doubt that sort of scaremongering because my wife grew up in a family of 15 children on a farm. They were part of a Christian sect that does not believe in medicine. She and her brothers and sisters never saw a doctor and never had an inoculation. They drank raw milk almost daily from conditions far less antiseptic than imposed on a modern organic dairy farmer, and they all turned out fine. Now look, I'm no pathogen researcher, and I know 15 kids on one farm isn't a great sample size, so check out this testimony to the Colorado Department of Health by an organic farmer who did check up with some researchers. His name was Mark McAfee, and he testified in Colorado to this, quote, "I've been requested to share with you our commercial organic raw milk production and sales experience. For the last 4 years, Organic Pastures Dairy has produced a full line of raw organic dairy products for retail sale, 300 stores including Whole Foods, and consumption here in California. The state of California monitors and tests all our raw dairy products multiple times a month. The state has never found one pathogen, either Salmonella, E. coli, or Listeria, in any of our products. Even more interesting is the fact that not one human pathogen has ever been found in the hundreds of environmental swabs that we have taken in our plant facility. Dr. Katarina Burge, a doctor of veterinary medicine and PhD candidate at UC Davis, tested our milk cows' fresh manure, tested the manure of the cows, and did not find any human pathogens. That's right, no salmonella. She was able to show that when antibiotics are ever used on a herd, as stated in organic standards, and when cows are not stressed, that is, they're grass-fed and kept healthy, they simply do not slough off pathogens in their manure. The data collected at organic pastures was quite different from that found at other dairies. The typical conventional milk tank had either salmonella or E. coli detected about 30% of the time. In comparison, organic pastures has never had one pathogen ever. To study the issue further, Organic Pastures contracted with BSK Labs in Fresno to perform multiple challenge and recovery tests on our raw milk and raw colostrum. When 7 logs, and that's 10 million pathogens, 10 million little bacteria, were added to 1 milliliter samples of raw milk, they would not grow. In fact, they died off. The salmonella was so badly outcompeted it could not be found less than 24 hours later. The listeria drop was less dramatic and was similar to the E. coli samples that were studied, but they also did not grow and declined substantially over time. The lab concluded, quote, "Organic raw milk and colostrum do not appear to support the growth of pathogens," end quote. So, what we've learned here is that most of the need for milk pasteurization comes from the conditions in which we factory farm dairy cows. Healthy cows that are free to graze make healthy milk, with beneficial enzymes and bacteria that outcompete the bad bacteria. Regardless, even if we're harmful, do we not trust adults anymore to make informed decisions about the foods they eat and the medicines they take? Do you really want to know how much more likely you are to contract listeria, salmonella, and E. coli from a corporate value meal burger than from a small-time organic dairy farmer's raw milk? How far should the government go in the name of protecting the environment, the wildlife, and us from ourselves? When it comes to Gibson guitars, organic dairy farmers, and medical marijuana patients, the Obama administration believes these are threats worthy of an armed SWAT response.